Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome back to another episode of Legal Ease, the show that converts legal jargon into legal ease. Now, tonight, I'd like you to just imagine for a second that you're walking in a public area and suddenly your child goes missing. Some of you might have seen footage of this. Or you get a call that says your child hasn't returned. What does that do to you and how do you feel? Now, in order for us to put perspective to this, we are going to be discussing tonight the topic of human trafficking. And I'm joined tonight by an excellent expert in this field, a lady that really has a very long CV, but extremely capable, Professor Nina Mollema. Good evening, Professor.
Good evening.
And welcome to Legal Ease.
Thank you so much, Ashraf. Thank you for the invitation.
Now, it's critical that we understand the background to such a topic. But briefly, I'd like to just go through your CV, just to give the readers, our viewers, an understanding of what the kind of expertise you have and why this topic is so important for us to concentrate on. So, Professor Nina Mollema teaches criminal law and international criminal law at the Department of Criminal and Procedural Law at UNISA. She has attained the following qualifications: BA Honours, HED at University of Pretoria, MA from Vista University, a doctorate in literature and philosophy, LLB, LLM, LLD, UNISA. Her legal doctoral thesis focuses on human trafficking in South Africa, comparing the South African legal response to combat human trafficking to other jurisdictions as well as international standards. She is also involved in human trafficking initiatives at the University of South Africa, such as the Child Trafficking and Justice Community Projects. In this regard, she raises the awareness of the crime and makes available counter-trafficking initiatives by way of publications and training of under and postgraduate students. She has published in many journals and has received the Hugo de Groot Award in 2014 for Best Contribution in Journal for Contemporary Roman Dutch Law on combating, this is the topic, combating human trafficking in South Africa, a critical evaluation of the prevention and combating of traffic in persons, Act 7 of 2013. She has presented papers at international and national conferences in South Africa, Botswana, Namibia, Swaziland, Brazil, Cuba, Australia, and the United States of America. You can just imagine the kind of expertise that we are fortunate to be sitting with today. But just by way of brief introduction, the scourge of human trafficking is not a new phenomenon. Slavery, which is a form of human trafficking, was formally abolished by the British Empire in 1833, and more than 750,000 slaves subsequently freed. However, today it is widely recognized that modern slavery is now more widespread than in any other time in world history, and that almost no country is unaffected by it. Especially over the past 3 decades, human trafficking has emerged as an issue of considerable concern for the international community. Although the exact extent of human trafficking cannot be ascertained because of its clandestine nature, it is estimated that 27 million people are in slavery worldwide, and that at its most general level, 12.3 million people are trafficked worldwide at any given time. Now, this is from the U.S. Department of State Trafficking in Persons report. Human trafficking is a significant facet of international organized crime and one of the most lucrative criminal enterprises globally. The crime was ranked in 2015 as the second most profitable crime around the world next to the drug trade, making it the fastest growing source of revenue for organized criminal operations internationally. Now, trafficking in children has especially boomed over the last few decades and is worldwide of a major concern. As many other governments around the world, South Africa has also committed itself to enacting national human trafficking legislation so as to address modern-day slavery. However, Professor, is this enough? Is legislation enough to combat human trafficking?
Well, obviously, Ashraf, it's a starting point. You have to begin somewhere.
Right.
And before we had this specific legislation that you mentioned, the Combating and Prevention of Trafficking Act 7 of 2013, the courts had to rely on different auxiliary legislation,
Right.
So which was obviously not enough. To sentence, for example, for sentencing, they did not have enough, it was not severe enough for traffickers. So we needed this specific and comprehensive legislation to combat. That's definitely a starting point. It is not enough. But first, you know, this is a beginning. This is definitely a beginning.
But what would you define as human trafficking? What is human trafficking?
Well, in our act that we have, we have a very comprehensive and a very lengthy definition, which basically follows the United Nations Trafficking Protocol, the example that they provided. Now, I'm not going to give you the very lengthy definition, but I'm going to just summarize to you and say that human trafficking basically is the moving of a person from one country to another, or even within the country, through by means of force, fraud, or even manipulation, for the purpose of exploitation or abuse of such a person. Now, I'm saying moving, but it could be other acts as well. It could be harboring even of a person. But that's a very simplified definition of human trafficking.
Look, I think a topic of this magnitude has recently been brought right into our living rooms. We can see the migration of huge numbers of people into Europe. Behind all of these movements of people are great rings of traffickers.
Definitely.
There's apparently a boatload of people could net a trafficker $5,000 or something, and half of the people don't even make it into Europe. The vehicles that they use are not suitable. But just to put into perspective, so South Africa is aware that there is this program of trafficking. We have legislation. But is that sufficient? It's just legislating the crime. Does that necessarily stop it?
Definitely not. I mean, like I said at the beginning, it helps. And it is definitely something that has to be in place to combat the crime. But there are so many other things that you need. For example, vigilance of every person as well. You know, you just brought up the problem of migrants.
Yes.
Now, many people do not know the difference between illegal migrants and human trafficking. We've had so many cases these days of, I remember twice now in the last month now, where truckloads of people were discovered. These cases were not human trafficking cases, as far as I know, but illegal migrants, migrants that come from neighboring countries, where they basically are smuggled abroad over the border for better work opportunities or better living conditions. So you have to draw the distinction between human trafficking and illegal migrants. That's quite important.
I think trafficking really means that somebody's making money
Definitely.
from selling these people's services or withholding their passports or whatever.
Yes.
And illegal migrants are those that pay somebody to traffic them across. So there's no sale of that individual as such.
Yes.
It's just a journey. So an important distinction nevertheless. What happens to young children? I think they're the most vulnerable.
They are.
Recently we read, I think it's about a month ago, of two incidences. There was one in KwaZulu-Natal on the Swaziland border, and the other one was a Malawian trafficking ring that brought 14 children over in a car. It's quite frightening.
That is terrible. It is definitely terrible.
Are they the most vulnerable?
They
children?
are. They are the most vulnerable. I mean, that is what human traffickers target. They target the most vulnerable in society. Migrants, of course, they are also most vulnerable. I mean, they are in a situation where they are in a illegal country, you know, they can't go to the police, they have nobody to go to, but, you know, women and children are naturally amongst the most vulnerable in society. So obviously children, and as you said in your introduction as well, children are more and more targeted for trafficking. It's horrific. I mean, it's really horrific just to think about it. I, being a parent myself, cannot imagine, you know, a child being trafficked and the situations that they are being, you know, the things that they are put through. It's horrible.
But it gets worse now because even babies are trafficked.
Yes, definitely they are.
So you would expect a teenager who would be able to work, or a young girl that is sold into sexual slavery. You would expect those things. But now one reads that even babies are trafficked. I mean, the horror doesn't end.
No, it does not. And you know what? Babies are normally trafficked for illegal adoption.
Ah.
If that, and that is in the Act as well, and it's illegal, it's unlawful. If that is so, I think that's one of the better situations, because babies can be trafficked these days for much worse crimes. For sexual exploitation, pornography. I mean, you won't believe it, but you know, a baby, but definitely that can happen, and it's been proven that it does happen.
And one reads again another horror story of people being trafficked for organs. Their organs are removed.
Yes.
And then they are left to die somewhere. And they might be missing their kidneys or some other organ. And again, there's a price to be paid. I recall some hospital recently in South Africa was involved in some kidney swapping and things. I don't know.
There was a case quite some time ago, I think, in KwaZulu-Natal, in Durban, which was exposed for trafficking of organs to Israel, I think it was the country. But that is definitely, I mean, that's a cultural thing as well. If you think about our cultural situation in South Africa, that certain organs are harvested for, you know, from especially children.
Yes.
Or albinos, or, you know, for certain medicinal or magical purposes. So
traditional
that's
doctors
right.
that traffic. And
so that's also a reality that you have to think about.
And that often results in murder of these children. I mean, you can never find them. Now, we've spoken of legislation, and we've now concluded that it's really not enough.
No.
We spoke of vigilance. Give us an example in your daily existence. How would you, for example, pick up that there's something wrong in that house? These people have been trafficked. What would be some of the telltale signs?
Well, first of all, knowing what human trafficking is, that is the first thing. Before you can actually identify a situation of human trafficking. Unusual occurrences in a human trafficking case would be, for example, be where people are being held captive, or where a person is only allowed out on the street under the watchful eye of another person. If they are allowed, normally they are held captive in an area where they are not allowed out. But in certain situations they are allowed, but they are watched. And if you can basically see something like that, you know, and you have to report it. I mean, the Act actually says that you have to report it. If you do not report an incidence of a human trafficking which you know or you suspect that human trafficking is happening, that you are actually guilty of a crime. Yes, and then you may be prosecuted for that crime.
So, if you know or you suspect, so there's two different scenarios.
Definitely.
Now, let's say you get it wrong. Can you be sued? I mean, you know, you suspect somebody's been trafficked. Let's say bride. You know, there's a lot of mail order brides, right?
Yes.
That seems to be taking off here in this country. And, you know, you now suspect that, look, there's something's not right here. So you're obliged to do that, otherwise you yourself would be charged. Is it a defense to say, I had to report this, otherwise I would have been charged.
Well, you know what, if you made an honest report where you basically bona fide believed that what happened, you will not be charged at all. Obviously, there has to be an investigation, and if it proved to be false, you will not be charged. But it still says that you have a duty to report if you suspect even that there is a child or an adult being trafficked in your region.
Well, on that note, it's time to take a break. Please stay tuned and join us after the break. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Here's a reminder that you are tuned to Legal Ease, the show that converts legal jargon into legal ease. And tonight we're discussing a very important topic of human trafficking. And to help us understand this, we have in the studios Professor Nina Mollema, who's really an expert in this, who lectures in this and has written lots and lots of articles and has taken a very practical approach to this. Now, just before the break, we spoke about legislation and what really, how does legislation impact on your duty, or do you have a duty to go and report this? And we were trying to distinguish between where you get it right and when you get it wrong. But fortunately, even if you get it wrong, you're not going to be on the wrong side of the law. Now, just going forward, it must be extremely difficult to monitor and to conscientize somebody about human trafficking. And it doesn't occupy, I think, most people's everyday affairs, right? You're not thinking that somebody is being trafficked. But let's say you go into a factory or into a shop, and often you'd find some kind of assistance there from a person who's from outside the borders. I mean, what would alert you? What would alert you to the fact that this person is trafficked? Is there something that you could do practically to educate yourself?
Well, labour exploitation is quite difficult because the belief is that labour exploitation is more actually than sexual exploitation. If you think about it, for trafficking for sexual purposes, you actually need a client, else the service won't exist. But for trafficking for labour exploitation is very well hidden. That's why even the cases that we have very few labour human trafficking cases, which the United States Trafficking in Persons report. They always they say that we can improve that definitely. That's why, it's very difficult because these people are basically kept hidden or captive in their place of work, and normally they work and they sleep there. So you normally do not see these people. Unless they do escape and alert authorities to their situation. So in those labour cases, it's very difficult, because you do not come into contact with the workers themselves. It's not that they need a client as a sexual person, a sexual exploitation. They just sit and do their work.
But it's quite onerous, I would believe. If you're a client in a place that traffics in sexual cases, then what were you doing there in the first place?
Well, most people do say that they are not aware. People, because as you know, the Act actually criminalizes the use of the services of trafficked persons. So if you're a client, you may also be criminalized. You may also be prosecuted. So yes, so they just say that they did not know. That's the basically, they just plead ignorance. I did not know that this person was trafficked. But normally it is quite clear. I mean, the person, if you go into a room where the young girl is kept under lock and key, and they actually have to unlock the door for you to enter, then definitely there must be something wrong there. These girls are also normally all on drugs because they have to keep them subdued so that they do not run away, and they comply with everything that they say. So these girls are also very drugged as well. So that's something that you can look out for as well.
But the legislation is not without controversy. Is that right?
Well, you know what? The legislation is quite comprehensive, I must say, and according, in my opinion, it is. It's better even than the example set by the United Nations Trafficking Protocol, because it improves on it and it actually gives you the specific situations for South Africa, like we talked about forced marriage, which is the Ugutwala situations, which you have quite a lot in South Africa as well.
Now that's interesting because it's not really publicized that there is this forced marriage. This is where you can go to another tribe, capture a young girl, take her away for sexual purposes, and then later on marry her. Is that?
No, you know what? Ugutwala, as I understand it traditionally, was basically where a young old maid or an old maid who could not get married and a single young person who also does not have a mate were being brought together through this Ugutwala, being the family of the man would kidnap the lady, but it would all be under the consent of all parties. In other words,
So it wasn't a forced kidnapping.
It wasn't a force.
Consented.
It's consent. It's basically bringing two people together. That was now what I understand the traditional meaning of Ugutwana or Twala was. But now what has happened is that parents sell their, especially young girls who cannot consent in the first place, to much older men who they do not know. And to go and marry this person, where she does not know the person, she did not agree to this marriage, and it's a much older man as well, much older man.
But is that still prevalent? I mean, I get the sense that you're saying it is, but it's not really publicized.
It is according to the Global Slavery Index, who did a study in 2015, and they published their reports in 2016. They say that 10,000 people in South Africa are submitted to 10,000 in 2050 to forced marriage.
Now, on average, in the 12-month period, that's like 800 brides. That's 3 a day, or it's...
now remember...
No, it's more, it's about like 30 a day.
Now, if you go back to this basically tells you about the manner in which human trafficking estimates are done, because the Global Slavery Index said that they estimate that in 2015 there were almost 250,000 people being slaved in South Africa, being modern slaves in South Africa.
That's a huge and staggering amount of people.
That is quite a lot of people, I must say. But like I said, Ashraf, it is an estimate. What they did was they took a sample where they looked at different practices, such as forced marriage, as we said, sexual exploitation, forced labor, debt bondage, child exploitation, and so on.
So it was just let's unpack. What's debt bondage?
Now, debt bondage is something that you actually get quite a lot in the Asian countries, where somebody has to work for somebody else because of a debt that the person himself or even his family member made. So because the family member cannot pay off the debt, this person is now obliged to go and work for free for the other person. That's debt bondage.
It's quite prevalent in India, I think.
That's right, it is, yeah.
Just a reminder to our viewers, the lines are open. You're welcome to engage with Professor. Very, very important topic. As I said at the beginning, just imagine your child has gone missing and has been trafficked. What do you do? What about the victim? Well, what rights does the victim have, the family? Do they have any rights?
Well, the victim is definitely provided for in the Act. First of all, the Act gives the guarantee to the victim that they will not be prosecuted for any crimes that perhaps may have happened while they were being trafficked. So that's very important.
Prostitution.
That's right. That is very important. So else victims will not come to the front. I mean, they will not do that at all. The second thing is that victims, have to be identified. Obviously, not everybody who claims to be a victim of trafficking will be a victim of trafficking. So there is an identification process in the Act as well, which is very important.
Yeah.
And after the victim has been identified, there are different services that the victim has, health services that the victim has access to, and basic needs services, which is also important. The victim has access to will be placed in a shelter where the victim will be protected. The one thing that the Act states is that the victim has access to all these services if the victim is prepared to be a witness against the trafficker in a criminal case.
Now, are they afforded safe homes, these victims? Is there some process of training them for the court case? These are difficult matters for a victim who is already scared and has been trafficked, doesn't understand that they won't be charged with whatever crime that they might have committed. Let's just take a crude example. Let's say they were made to into a begging, although begging is not itself a crime, but were made to go and shoplift.
Yes.
So now you belong to a gang. You're breaking the law. And as a result, you can be prosecuted. So those victims, is there a place for them, a safe home, a call number, like a national call center? What can they do?
Well, obviously there's a helpline that's just been, and there's a dedicated national human trafficking helpline.
Okay.
The number is 0800
Yes.
222 777.
So it's an easy number, 0800
222 777, where victims can call, and of course, even people who suspect situations of human trafficking are happening, they can also call this number. It's an anonymous line, so you do not need to identify yourself. Victims, of course, can get help there as well, and where they are directed to the nearest police station where they will be helped, or so on.
Okay, time to take another break. Please stay tuned and join us after the break. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And here's a reminder that you tune to Legal Ease, the show that converts legal jargon into legal ease. Tonight we're covering an extremely important topic of human trafficking, and I am joined by Professor Mollema from UNISA, who certainly knows a lot about this topic. Professor, just in terms of numbers and comparisons internationally, could you help us to just understand how big this problem is?
Well, human trafficking, first of all, is a serious problem.
Yes.
Worldwide, it is a very serious problem. The Global Slavery Index, for example, estimated that in 2015 there were more than 45 million people trafficked in the world. Now, 45 million is an immense amount of people.
Absolutely.
So, and these are the same foundation. This is the same foundation that said that more in 2015, 250,000 people were trafficked in South Africa alone. They also looked at South Africa.
Is that like a annual figure, or is that the total amount of people?
That's an annual figure that they did for that year only.
That's a 250,000 people.
So that just shows you how serious the crime is. But obviously, Ashraf, human trafficking is a hidden crime. It's clandestine. So we cannot really ascertain these numbers. We cannot verify these numbers. It is, as we call it, guesstimates. You guess the estimate. And the same global the Global Slavery Index did exactly that. They took a random sample and they basically multiplied with their whatever they do to get to that baseline. That's right.
Yes. But interesting that you say that 250,000 people per annum. Now, I think one of the things that I've read recently is this, where a job is offered to you. So you're completely innocent, You see this advert in the paper, a job is offered, come with this qualifications, and you go in And usually, they traffic you out of South Africa. They send you to some foreign destination. You think you're going there to have a very nice, cushy job. Now, how do you cross-check this? Is there some way of really, determining, am I going to be swallowed up and anonymous somewhere else?
You know, Ashraf, if the offer is too good to be true,
yes,
then it's definitely not true. Yes. That's the first thing to be wary of.
Right.
The second thing is, even if you sometimes are in a desperate situation for a job, because sometimes they do make it very believable.
Yes.
And I mean, for us, you're talking about people being trafficked outside South Africa. Obviously, for that purpose, you need a very good salary. But if you look at the rest of Africa, they are being trafficked into South Africa for minimal amounts of money. And then, I mean, there are syndicates basically focusing on people, whether it's via Facebook, any media that you can make use of. They traffic these, they place adverts there that they have a job, whether it is a domestic job or looking after children, and you need no qualifications, you just need to come to this place, and you will be offered, say, 1,000 Rand or 1,500 Rand per month, which is minimal, I mean, really. But people are desperate.
Yes.
I mean, there's poverty.
Absolutely.
And people will go there, and only to find out when they arrive to that specific place that there is no such job, and they are being forced either into forced labor or into forced sexual exploitation.
And now, jurisdictionally, how, I'm sure this is as we said, international problem. How do other jurisdictions deal with this? What measures have they taken? Are those informative enough for us? Can we take some other kind of, can we learn from the international model?
Well, I think our legislation is very good. It's really comprehensive. It's better than the example put there, the prototype set out in the United Nations trafficking protocol. But the most recent legislation was put out by the United Kingdom, entitled the Modern Slavery Anti-Slavery Act, Modern Anti-Slavery Act of 2015. And they have actually placed some provisions in their act which we can learn from and benefit from.
Okay.
The first thing that they basically did was to include businesses.
Okay.
And where we do not have a provision like that at all in our act. And they basically said that businesses have to disclose the concrete steps that they are taking towards eradicating slavery from their source and supply. The supply and product change. Okay. So how they have to do that, in other words, they have to ensure that the people that they are using who are producing their material, for example, are not enslaved in that positions. And they have to put that into an annual report, and they also have to put out their business practices on their websites so that everybody can see that. Now, that's something positive that we can really do in South Africa as well, just to ensure that businesses do not use forced labor.
Right. What about child labor? There were reports of a number of international brands outsourcing their production to, say, some of the Asian countries. But little children were used to make all of these things.
Definitely.
Now, obviously, that attracts attention to the brand itself. They would also similarly be affected by this legislation in the UK. Have we got something equivalent here?
No, we do not. That's why I say this is where the businesses come in.
Right.
Okay, we do not, and we can definitely amend our legislation at a later stage to perhaps include something like this.
Right.
Because we do not focus on forced labor in that way. I think that is one of the things that we need to still do. They need to look at how businesses can make sure that they do not make use of child labor in another country.
Quite a big responsibility, but an area lacking in our law.
Definitely lacking.
Do you think legislation will be passed to fix it up?
It could be. I mean, it can be amended. That's. I mean, if you have your act, you can always amend your act later on to improve it. As is, we do not have it currently in our act. Another thing we can look at, for example, which the UK, the anti-slavery bill have in their act, is that they have a commissioner, which they called. Let me just quickly have a look at it. The Anti-Slavery Commissioner. Now, that is a specialist law enforcement agency, and they have the capacity to overlook the whole human trafficking goings on, you know, from whether the government and the NGOs are actually doing what they said they will do, or business as well. To basically looking, they have the powers of inquiry and so on. So this is a specific dedicated agency who works with human trafficking. We do not have something like that in South Africa. Now the bill had something like that, but in the act they actually left it out.
Oh, so it was up for discussion. I mean,
it was.
There were people that were aware when they were drafting.
Yes, because, yeah, definitely. This is one of the things that the UN protocol actually said that is necessary. If you want to combat human trafficking seriously in a jurisdiction, you need a specific law enforcement agency working only with human trafficking.
Now, with regard to recent legislation here, especially that by the Department of Home Affairs, that has insisted on the minor child traveling with an unabridged birth certificate. Now, that is compulsory for South Africans traveling abroad. There's no exemption.
That's right.
But for people coming in, foreign visitors, there is a discretion. However, this is quite inconsistent. Do you think it's had the desired effect that they've, for example, how many people have really been caught at a port of entry, official port of entry, with a minor child that is not supposed to be with them? Is there any?
You know, I know it's been bad for tourism. That's what's been suggested, that, you know, the new amendments to the Immigration Act did not have the desired effect. But in my opinion, anything that can stop the scourge of human trafficking, even if it's minor,
yes,
is worth the while. You know, I know of many other countries that insist on an unabridged birth certificate if you enter. So, I mean, why not us as well?
So it's not actually true that we're unique in the world to ask for a birth certificate?
Definitely not. Definitely not. It's an inconvenience at this stage, but I think as soon as we get used to the fact that we need it and it's freely available, maybe it will be better.
Yeah, and maybe in due course the department will also up its productivity of these. With regard specifically to children. Lots of children have also not been offered jobs, but been offered bursaries and study opportunities and modeling. I think modeling is one of those areas where there's a lot of exploitation. I mean, again, you know, we said that one must be careful, etc. But really, you being involved in this, you know, is there any known case that you've come across where? No. You know,
Ashraf, there you have to be very careful that you, because human trafficking is has a definite definition.
Yes.
Where, you know, you have to be kept you have to be kept captive for exploitation. Now, if there's something like modeling where the person does modeling, but there could be fraud even involved in there.
Yes.
But the person is not being kept captive, then it doesn't qualify as human trafficking.
So you must be kept against your will?
There must be no consent for you being there.
Right. But must there be some form of duress? Let's say you consent, but I mean, it's kind of grudgingly, okay, I'll stay, you know, if I can just get paid a bit. Duress, would that count as
duress will also
negating
count.
Consent?
No, duress will also count, but there are many situations where prostitutes, for example, are brought in from overseas. I mean, we have many cases from Chinese prostitutes or even Thai prostitutes where they are offered a job here as a prostitute, and they come willingly. They actually consent to do the job here in South Africa. But as soon as they arrive in South Africa, the passports are confiscated.
Which is illegal, by the way.
Which is illegal.
We have a call on the line. Caller, please go ahead.
Hi.
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 Good day, Professor. I'm a student from Unisa and I don't. I have a question with regards to persons. The prison sentences. What is it like?
I'm sorry, ma'am. Sorry, I have to stop you. We have an absolutely inaudible line. We can't hear a thing you're saying. Would you please call back? All right, thank you. Professor, I think we have the caller back online. We were talking about your passport being taken away by your employer.
Yes.
That is completely against the law.
Definitely it is against the law.
No one may hold your passport, which is really a document belonging to a foreign government.
Definitely.
For any purpose.
Definitely. Yeah, and you know what the person is when the person does not have her passport in a foreign country, I mean, she's lost.
Yes.
First of all, there's nobody to communicate with this person because mostly, I mean, she's Thai. She doesn't know the local languages. There's a barrier there. She's told that the police works with the owners of the brothel. So she does not need to go to the police because they are, you know, hand in hand, working hand in hand. So she's scared to go to the police, and she's basically kept captive. Now she still performs her job as prostitute of sex work, but she does not get paid for it, or she gets minimal amount of payment. So that's definitely a human trafficking situation.
Well, Jen, on that very same topic, Thai nationals are visa exempt, so they can actually land in South Africa.
That's right.
And obtain a 30-day visa to remain. I think that's where the problem comes in, that there's no checks and balances coming forward. I believe we have a caller. Caller is back online. Okay. We're having a problem with that line. We'll ask you to please stay tuned. We're going for a short ad break. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome back to Legal Ease, the show that converts legal jargon into legal ease. And tonight we are joined by Professor Mollema, who is an expert in human trafficking. Now, just before the break, we had a caller. We invite you to please call back. The line was very, very bad. We couldn't hear you. Professor, just with regard to victims, okay, we've tried to understand that there's legislation protecting, etc. Can they claim monies? I mean, what's the comparison with, say, another jurisdiction? In South Africa, can you as a victim claim money for being trafficked? And if so, from whom? And compare that to another jurisdiction.
Yes, our Act definitely says that victims of trafficking who have testified against their trafficker and the trafficker has been convicted can claim compensation from the trafficker. The only problem here is that the funds, the resources of the trafficker is sometimes very difficult to locate, especially if a criminal...
Professor, I ask you to please pause. We have the caller. Caller, please go ahead.
Good day.
Good day.
I have a question with regards to trafficking of persons. As you've mentioned earlier, that you get trafficking of children and also labor exploitation.
Yes.
I'm a law student, so I'm trying to figure this out a bit. With regards to the sentences you impose in a criminal case, what exactly is the sentence that are imposed for trafficking of persons? Like with regards to children, we understand that, okay, in a case, the child interest is of paramount importance with regards to Section 28 of the Constitution. So would sentencing for trafficking of children would be higher compared to adults, or how exactly does it work?
First of all, that is a wonderful question, and I do hope that you're a law student at UNISA.
Yes, I am.
Oh, it's fantastic. Well done. No, that's excellent. You know, the sentencing for human trafficking ranges from a 5-year prison sentence. That's for the lightest. That's, for example, for assisting somebody, or very light sentence, to life sentencing, so to spending your whole life in jail. And money-wise, a fine can be imposed on you from the highest is 100 million rand. Now, that's a lot, and that is for severe crimes. And obviously, children are definitely the most vulnerable trafficking beings that you can find. So they will get the highest, the traffickers will get the highest sentence, definitely.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your call.
That's quite surprising, 100 million.
100 million, that is a lot of money. Now, obviously, that was done for a purpose.
Yes.
Okay, and it's basically, if you think of carriers as well, because this sentence involves carriers of human trafficking.
Now, when you say carriers, you mean any mode of conveyance?
That's right.
Aircraft.
That's it.
Now, which legislation dictates that? Or where would we find that legislation that if an aircraft or an airline has been involved in unlawful rendition of children, they have to be fined?
Well, it's in the Act itself, first of all. I mean, it's specified in the Act, so that's where we find the the Prevention and Combating of Trafficking Act, the Trafficking Act, or South African Trafficking. So it's specified there, and I think that's quite a hefty sentence.
Absolutely, that should scare quite a few airlines into...
Oh, definitely. And they can pay, but definitely, hopefully, it's preventative.
Yes.
That is what the purpose is, that they do not dare, even go in that way.
Yes, yes. So is it a commonplace that... do we know of any specific matter in which an airline was found complicit in human trafficking?
Not as yet in South Africa. Ashraf, I must also say that the new legislation was only became active last year.
Yes. So we're still on a learning
we're still on the law.
Yes.
We do not have a case yet with the 2013 acts. We can actually say all the previous cases were done by auxiliary or transitional legislation.
But again, I'm worried about... You see, we have porous borders, and
we do.
We observing the trafficking in what we would consider ideal situations, that the guy walks in with his victim at an airport, which is not going to happen. These children, these people are trafficked in the back of trucks, in petrol tankers, in so many different ways through our porous borders. Sometimes they even, we have very... generous refugee laws, and a trafficker could come in with a whole lot of children and claim they're his own. You're obliged to let them in. So just to come back to that very interesting comparison with the UK. So in the UK there's a fund.
Yes.
And that fund pays the victims.
Yes.
Okay.
There's a special victims fund.
Right.
So in South Africa, we can only claim from the trafficker themselves if there are funds. And the state even gets a cut from the trafficker's money.
Oh.
Yeah. Okay. So that's also in the Act. But in the UK, you can also have a civil claim against the trafficker.
Right.
But you can also claim from the Special Victims Fund, where all excess monies are from traffickers that have been convicted and sentenced are placed in. So those are especially for human trafficking victims who do not have access to monies as well.
Right.
For example, those victims where the trafficker could not be located.
Right.
Okay, that's the other one thing. So there's a victim without a trafficker, or some victims feel very vulnerable and do not want to testify.
Right.
So those victims also do not have access to any funds except this special victims funds.
Right.
And even potential trafficking victims may claim from this fund.
Oh, potential victims,
even
not
potential,
actual victims.
Even potential victims may claim from this fund. So I think that's also an improvement which our legislation can look towards. You know, if they want to amend it, obviously funding is a big problem, resources in South Africa. So we need, but we can definitely consider something like that. I think that's a positive change.
And South Africa, does it bring a lot of international attention to the efforts we're making? Are people commending us? Where are we in the, let's say, in the scale of traffickers? We are right at the bottom or right on top?
Well, you know what, they have commended us for our legislation, which is modern.
Right.
And very comprehensive, as I said already,
Yes.
although it still can be improved. You know, it can always be improved.
Right.
So, but with that, like I said, we can do through further amendments. But unfortunately, you know, it's like we started off, it's not only legislation.
Right.
It's basically enforcement as well.
Right.
There we do not have, we actually ranked very poorly.
Yes.
This Global Slavery Index ranked us as 27th in the world, so in the top 50 of people being trafficked in the world. So that's quite bad.
Okay, that's not a nice accolade to have. And unfortunately, Professor, we've run out of time. Thank you very much for giving us very deep insight. And to you, the viewers, please keep this in mind. The professor's details are available. And if you have any other further questions, you could get in touch with her. Thank you very much.
Thank you.